And hi, everyone. My name is Perry Williams. I'm a program coordinator with the Maine Downtown Center and Maine Development Foundation. This webinar today is being brought to you by Maine Downtown Center, Maine Department of Economic and Community Development Housing Opportunities Program, and of course, Build Maine. And I just wanted to give a quick reminder to everyone to make sure that you are on mute unless you are actively participating in today's call. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Ben for another introduction.
Good morning, all. Thank you for that, Perry. So I am Ben Averill. I'm one of the two Housing Opportunity Program coordinators. I'm currently with the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development, and in about a month with the Maine Office of Community Affairs as that office gets established. We are very pleased to be able to help facilitate this PlaceCode training through one of our grant processes. And for any folks that are on the call that have not interacted with us, our program does primarily land use reform and housing policy work for the state of Maine. We assist both municipalities and service providers to provide technical assistance and financial assistance as folks across the state are looking to do land use reform related to increasing housing, as well as to do master planning efforts or other housing related policy conversations throughout their community. This training so far has been great. I've had the chance to attend or to watch the first two sessions, so I hope other folks have as well. The Our contact information will be changing, but I will put my personal email in the chat, and that would be the best way to reach out to my program. As I mentioned, we will be joining the Maine Office of Community Affairs in about a month, so all of our information will be updated in September, but you can see my email as well as our current website in the chat shortly.
Great. Thanks, Ben. All right, Ben Fry, do you want to get us kicked off and start and let me know when you would like to do screen share?
Great. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. This is the third webinar about the Maine PlaceCode, and we are very excited to do a little bit more of a deep dive. The first one, Ivy Van and I did, which was a general introduction. The second one was more, Vanessa and Ivy handled that one and did a little bit more of, specific introduction to the PlaceCode. This one is really intended to be more of a deeper dive on some issues. We're not going to be able to hit everything. We're going to focus on a couple of key elements of coding in general and the PlaceCode specifically. And we want to change it up a little bit for this webinar. So it's going to be a little bit, we've got a slide deck, we've got a slideshow, we've got a whole bunch of stuff to show you, but we also want to have a little bit of back and forth. So a little bit more workshop style, a little less lecture. So we've got some time in here for questions. We're going to take a short break at some point if we get too hot and heated, and we've got some time built in to tell some stories. We want to hear some of your stories. We want to know kind of what's going on in your thoughts in your towns, some challenges that you might have. We want to share with you some challenges that we've had and ways that we've used the code to solve those problems or haven't. And so a little bit less formal today, I guess. And so, Vanessa, if you could go ahead and throw up the deck, you're going to have control. I'm not going to have control.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second.
Which is totally fine. Okay.
Okay. Great.
Awesome. Maine PlaceCode Library 301. So the other thing I want to say real quick before we get started is thank you, all of you, for your interest. We're really hoping that those of you that are here, and maybe those that have attended the previous ones, but this one in particular, we're really hoping that you're obviously interested enough to be here. We're hoping that our attitude and your attitude is that we want to partner on this code because we're excited about it. We're excited about bringing better coding practices to Maine, and the innovations that are inside the PlaceCode, and we want to continue that work. So what we're looking for is all of you. I'm seeing you again, that's not the slide.
Yeah, I'm just having a wacky time with my screen, so
okay,
give me one
that's
second.
fine.
Sorry.
So we're hoping that the idea here is you're all coders, you're all interested in code, you're geeky about code, you're up late at night worrying and thinking about code, and we're with you. That's who we are. The number of texts and emails and midnight conversations I've had with some of these folks here in my cohort are numerous, because when inspiration strikes, you have to talk to somebody. And we're hoping that you view us and we can bring you into that fold so we can all geek out and bring better coding practices to Maine and beyond. So I'm going to just get started with the deck real quick, and again, we'll have more time. We've got more people joining in as they come. So,
and Ben,
right.
you can see the deck.
Thank you. I can see the deck. Everyone can see the deck.
Some of those late night conversations mean that I'm a little dysfunctional with my computer screen this morning. So great.
Right. Technical difficulties always exist. All right. So as everyone knows from the first 2 training sessions, the PlaceCode is based on the idea of utilizing the transect, which is been around for a long time. I'm sure a lot of you who are planners are familiar with this. And so I don't have to go into it too deeply here, and I'm not going to. I just want you to know that when we use the terminology T1, T2, this is what we're talking about. T5, we're talking about the density of development. We're talking about how districts are laid out, and in general, when we say T2 or T4, we're referring to a type of district. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
go ahead, Ben. I just muted Dorothy.
Oh, no problem. All right. So again, T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, other than what you can see is the obvious progression of density from rural to urban. The major thing to remember as we're going through and we're talking, because a lot of this is going to be district-based discussion today, is T1 and T2 generally have either no public facilities, no sewer and water, or very little. T4, T5 at the urban end of the scale, it's ubiquitous. And so T3 in the middle is sometimes yes, sometimes no. That's the major distinction there. You want to go to the next slide, Vanessa?
Yep.
All right. So we're going to talk about districts. The first thing I want to say about districts and thinking about districts and thinking about coding is that the traditional way, the non-form-based code way of thinking about districts is to look at a map and to sort of look and see what the uses are in the area and what the density is in the area. In other words, how much it's developed. Form-based coding is very, very different. It doesn't assume that we can tell what a district is or comprised of until we go and measure it. And that's really important. I'm going to keep saying it over and over in different ways if I can remember, that form-based coding goes out onto the streets, into the neighborhoods, into all those T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, T6, and bases the decisions for how districts are comprised on the measurements that are found there. And those measurements, if you can flip to the next slide, Vanessa, are everything that you can measure kind of goes into the calculus of determining the district. So you kind of put your judgmental brain on hold for a few minutes when you're thinking about setting up districts, and you try to use the measurements to help you tell you where the districts are and specifically where the edges of the districts are. So this is a standard synoptic survey form. This one's blank for a T5 urban center, or what you might assume to be. And you can see that there's places for pictures, but you're measuring the lots, the width and depth. You're measuring all these things, if you can actually go to the next slide, Vanessa, we'll see one that's filled out. Okay, this is one that we actually did in Newcastle. I'm from Newcastle. I'm on the select board and the planning board, unfortunately, at the time. But back when we did this, this was kind of a brand new thought, a brand new idea, a different way of thinking about it. Our districts at the time were kind of a mess. What you would sort of think about as someone had sat down and literally just drawn blobs around different areas and said, this is this, this is this, and our growth district was all messed up. When this idea came to us from our contractor, it was sort of an eye-opening moment. Like, we didn't realize that you could really determine districts in a more meaningful way by physically measuring everything. So we went out there and we did that. We did several field trips with a large group of people and tape measures and measuring wheels, and it was a great experience to actually be able to put numbers behind why you're deciding where your districts are and what those districts are. And you can always fall back and say, this district is comprised of these types of buildings with these types of measurements. That has real value, especially going forward, thinking about how you want to relegate uses in those districts. So the form and scale of someplace is much more important in form-based coding, obviously, than initially thinking about the use and like the lot size. So lot size and use is a typical way of thinking about it. Measurements are the basis of a form-based code. You want to go to the next slide, Vanessa? We've got a couple of different ones here. So this is Yarmouth, and this is great because you can see, if we just look real quick, everybody can see this, right? You're actually talking about like the type of street, and these are different types of synoptic surveys, by the way. They're not all the same. They try to capture, thank you, Vanessa. I love the cursor, that's perfect. They try to capture important information about the road here in particular, which is, and the type of road that it is, the components that are on the road, the curb, all of that goes into determining what the district is and how it's comprised. So once you have started looking around, and jump in here, Vanessa, if I'm repeating myself.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
you're not, but go ahead.
Oh,
No, I
I'm
was just
not.
gonna,
Okay.
no, you're not. You're doing great.
I tend to repeat myself.
It's good for us.
The process we're talking about, we're doing a synoptic survey. You're measuring the houses, you're measuring what you think are the lots. Maybe you're not looking at a map, so you're not entirely sure, but you're measuring the spaces between the houses, you're measuring the setback from the road itself, the width of the sidewalk. You're measuring all of that, and you're looking to see what are the similarities in this area, geographic area, and what are the differences, and when does it start to transition from a certain type of density, a certain type of setback, certain building types? When do the houses start to become bigger or further apart? And that clues you into where the edges of districts can be. And again, the most important thing I think about this whole process is you don't have to go measure absolutely everything, but you need to measure enough so that you recognize where those fuzzy edges are. And when we talk about creating districts, we actually talk about the fuzzy edges a lot because it's not always clear exactly where one district begins and another district ends. There's often bleed over, and sometimes what can look like one district, actually, we have some good pictures of this later on, can actually be like the higher end of one district or the lower end of the district next to it. But what you're looking for is that sort of contiguousness, that continuity of, here are building types that are very similar, and then they start to switch. The Maine PlaceCode library is at its core a building type ordinance, building type code. It's focused very strongly on identifying building types and understanding that those building types carry with them certain metrics that help to define those districts. And then later, after you've sort of measured everything, you've identified what building types are in a specific area, then you can start to look at like those uses. Thank you very much. Importance of dimensional standards. I think I said all this already. Am I missing anything, Vanessa?
No, I think you're doing great. So you just covered looking for building types. And I think that most important there is that there may be some anomalies and you want to know about those too. So it may be whether it's a metric or it's a building, there may be some very large buildings that stick out as an anomaly, and we're going to talk about how to code for those. And then there may be some dimensional standards that you're finding when you're doing synoptic surveying that are an anomaly, and then what do you do with those things too? So great.
So I'm going to let you get to this in just a second, but I want to say that if you are not, if you haven't seen, I think a lot of you have seen the Maine PlaceCode website. It's there's a link to it. I'll just tell you right now. We can show it later if we have time. It's hosted on Notion. It's mainplacecode.notion.site. You can go there, and if you go to Article 3, you'll find a link to all the building types. I think it's something like 23 different building types, primary and accessory building types at the moment. And we're constantly adding to it. So there's actually already a list in progress of more building types we're going to be adding. And those all have their own dimensional standards. And go ahead. I think, Vanessa, you're going to talk about district choices.
So I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds here on district choices, because what you are trying to achieve or accomplish is purely that expression by the district choice that you make. And so we talked initially about, and we're going to always keep coming back to this, it's sort of like the spectrum of protection to transformation. And it's incredibly important that you know what it is you're trying to code for in order to write code to back it. So protection is about the places that you want no change to occur. It may also be about historic districts. And it's and so both of those things then become expressed in the district choices and the dimensional standards that you calibrate to your place, and then the other pieces of code that you apply. Enhance is truly about, and I know that some of this might be repetitive if you've been in on some of the previous webinars. Enhance is about small adjustments and changes. It may be places in your community where you have gaps and spaces. So again, through synoptic surveying, that's the way that you're going to know how to code for whatever areas and that in your community that you want to see some infill occur. Those synoptic survey sheets are going to help you to calibrate whatever those metrics need to be in order to add something to the streetscape. And then of course, transformation, this is, I think, where there's equally as much power in the Maine PlaceCode library, through that process of deciding with your community places that should change, whether you're upzoning, but also if you're doing serious downzoning, that these become expressions of intent that is applied by using the districts and then the building types that go with it. So sprawl repair we covered in the last webinar, I think quite deeply. If you didn't see it, take a look back at that webinar. We showed examples of before and after scenarios and talked about how you choose the districts and the building types to accomplish transformation. So there's some other influences and things going on with district choices. And again, starting with that effort of synoptic surveying, if you have access to GIS and capabilities in your departments or, with your staff, you can use GIS to do some of that synoptic survey work, especially around nonconformities. But it's also just really good to be out there in doing the physical measurements. But in terms of correcting nonconformities, we have seen in a lot of communities where district assignments have sort of blanketed over swaths of a community with a metric that doesn't at all align with what's on the ground. So in making your choices about districts, you may decide that you have that there's enough of a distinction between the pattern of what's here and the density and the lot coverage and the setbacks, that you might decide one area that is previously zoned one thing might actually be two very distinctly different districts. And so that's that question of, well, could there be multiple of something? And I think a lot of codes, there's the simple codes that are, you know, they have a handful of districts, and you might have a village that really should be 3 districts when you look very closely at the pattern and the, you know, what's on the ground. Then there's communities that might have, like, for example, we were working in Nashua, New Hampshire, and I think they had 8 residential districts, and they went from, you know, 5,000 square feet to the quarter-acre lot, to the half-acre lot, to the 1-acre lot, to the 2-acre lot. And there, you know, for political reasons, you know, the idea of being able to collapse into a handful, like to shrink that number of districts, was a pretty challenging thing to do. But aside from the politics of, can you simplify your districts, you might have a couple of something out there. You might have a couple of T3 neighborhood districts. And here's one example from Rumford where, you know, one part of the community, it's, you know, this is pretty gappy. And if you go out and measure this, you're going to see, you know, there's spacing between buildings, and the buildings, some of them are right up onto the street. Some of them are pushing back a little bit, but this pattern might be distinctly different enough from another place in your town that it deserves being assigned its own T3 district. Sometimes it's era of development, so it might also be expressed in the building types. And I really love this image because it's showing sort of that coder's challenge of, at the top of the hill, you can see that tighter T3 neighborhood, but then you come down the hill and this is also T3, but these are much larger buildings, they're duplexes, and the spacing between them is much greater, and also their setbacks are bigger. So this is a very uniquely different pattern than what's going on just up the hill. So the coder's decision here is, do you make it the same, or are you going to nuance it and have 2 code sheets and 2 districts instead of 1? Ben or Ivy, do you want to add on to that? Because I think there's a lot going on in this image that is pretty cool to talk about.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. The building types, I'll emphasize, I guess, is part of the key difference here between the 2 T3 districts. They're both neighborhood districts, no question about it. But the size and scale of the buildings, therefore the actual building types, can be different. So you could code this as 1 district, but you could also, like Vanessa was saying, have a little bit more nuance by creating 2 districts. The back one perhaps maybe doesn't have duplexes as a building type. The front one absolutely would. And that's how you could understand the difference between the districts. And why that might be important is because maybe you want to, you know, either allow or enable or discourage certain uses from happening in those districts. And you could do that by enabling or disabling different building types. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Ivy?
Yeah, and I think that this is one of those things where what your community has told you is going to be really important, because if the community has said that, I mean, I'm looking at this back row and I'm seeing that it's bumping up against, it looks to me like it's bumping up against sort of the center. And so even though the building types in the back are smaller, this may be a place where the town has said, we're okay with this changing, that this could move to more building types like we see in the foreground. So if the town has established that this is a thing they're okay with, then in that case, the building types for both districts might be the same. So it's really a question, again, of what's our goal here? What have people said that they want?
So just to touch on, I think you were alluding to this sort of what's in the left here.
Yeah. I am.
Yeah, so a couple of interesting things about this actual place. They have no zoning. And then up in this sort of top left corner, this is coming up against what we would call T4. So there's some larger buildings, there's some civic buildings, there's apartments with multi-units in them. And then below and stepping down, and we have a slide to show that, is a transition to also more T4. So it's sort of like T3 small, T3 large, T4 on its edges.
Yeah. So again, what people have said is going to help us decide what kind of building types to allow there.
So this is touching on another kind of example of T3, and I call this like the extra gappy T3. And this shows up a lot in, I think, our villages and on those village edges. And this can be a real challenge for coding, because a lot of what people associate small village with is this gappy kind of randomness that goes on. And going back to the choice of community, if this is a great place to add more units of housing, this is a place to have more homes and more families, then you wouldn't code necessarily for the biggest lots. You would code for something maybe on the smaller range, so that these side yards that are existing here could fill in. Now I'm seeing a couple of really good size side yards, and I'm guessing that there's a mix of farming that happened and, you know, a range of age of development starting in the late 1800s. But this extra gappy T3, it becomes a choice. You're either going to use larger dimensions to sort of freeze it, or you may take the smaller on that scale or on that range, the smaller lot dimensions, in order to add gentle density. So add some more units of housing. And going back to what Ben said about why it's really important to also be observing your building typologies, you know, some of these buildings are quite large. So this is your typical connected farmhouse. These up here in this corner, they look like they're shifting maybe to something that was more like a shop house. So making sure that you're also enabling a mix of building types that would be appropriate to the scale of what's already here.
And I think just going back and kind of hammering on this sort of triadic thinking of the intent of a district should really be guided by one of three principles: protect, enhance, or transform. That'll help you understand what building types, you know, should be included in that district, what uses can be enabled in that district, and what should be either protected or, you know, enhanced. And I wish there was a better emphasis on that triad of thinking, but it's something that it organically comes about in conversations when you're doing your public engagement, and using that terminology sort of just solidifies it for people who know what they're talking about but don't have the vocabulary or the planner, you know, lingo down. And so using those terms, protect, enhance, transform, when you're talking about you know, distinct geographic areas, really does help the conversation along in terms of what's the point of the district, where's it going, what do we want it to do. Sorry.
No, that's good. So what would we do with this one? There's a lot going on here, and, you know, to kind of like take it apart, this to me is a pretty obvious, you know, there's nothing really fuzzy about the edge between what I think are two possible districts. We see in the background industry. So we might just leave that as an industrial special district. If it already exists, it may be assigned as a special district to sort of calibrate or code for some of the things that are already going on here. It could also just be straight up an industrial zone. But what's happening on the front here, this is sort of there's a couple of ways that you could code for this. If it's existing, we know that it's a mobile home park and there's state law, and that most likely is a module sheet. So if you have a mobile home park ordinance now, you would take that sheet of standards and you would incorporate it into the place code as a module. But it also could be handled as a special district. So you've said it's here, there might be things about it, and you want it to maybe change over time and you want to add some more permissions. Like perhaps you want to allow some commercial uses to be here if there was space for that. Another way to address mobile homes or the ability to add homes, and I want Ben to talk a little bit about what Newcastle did with this, is to just say that they are allowed and a mobile home can be anywhere in any district if that's your choice, and that the park is the thing that becomes coded as a module. So the park is assigned if you've taken a map of your town and you've said it goes here. It is a module if you're saying it goes into a special district or in any district. And it may just be that it's a code sheet for a mobile home as of right in a district. So Ben, do you want to maybe describe what Newcastle chose?
Yeah, so during our large and long protracted public engagement, what we heard over and over, and I think it's particularly relevant today, is housing is expensive, housing needs to be affordable, and mobile homes have their place. Now, mobile homes and mobile home parks get a bad rap. It's part of the reason why there is actually a state law requiring municipalities to provide space for them, because they do have that bad rap. In Newcastle, what we decided kind of early on was a home is a home is a home. And whether it's a mobile home or another type of manufactured home, a tiny house, or just a regular, 2,200 square foot cape or whatever the case may be, ranch, a house is a house is a house. And we took that position where anywhere that a house is allowed, a single family house on a lot in a district, a mobile home is allowed because it's classified as a house. That may be controversial, I think, but so far it's served us well. Mobile homes aren't that common in Newcastle. I know they are in other places, but just to give you an example of how important this conversation was to the residents of Newcastle, we have an historic district, and we allow mobile homes in that historic district on lots that butt up against classic federals and colonials, and other types of sort of classic, what you would consider historic district type architecture. Has it caused some conversation? Absolutely it has, but I think that's part of what's really important with understanding what a good district mix is, and what a good building type mix for a district is. And it's a way of bringing people into the conversation, which is, I think, really important for Maine, especially as we're talking about housing and the affordable housing crisis that we're in right now. The amount of gentrification that's happening in Maine is sort of astounding. It's been put into, warp speed, I guess, right now, especially on the mid-coast where I am. And I'm not saying that mobile homes are the silver bullet solution to that, but it's part of the solution, and they shouldn't be discarded. I think, as Vanessa was saying, this picture to me is really, really interesting because you could code it a couple of different ways. Newcastle would literally just say that's a neighborhood and those are houses.
And if you did that, though, you would have to abide by whatever that district standard was for metrics. So I think a couple of things going on here is, like, these houses, these mobile homes are turned sideways on their lots. So would this fit the Newcastle District 3 standard? Probably not. Would it fit Yarmouth's District 3 conventional? Because they chose to have two T3 districts, and one is a traditional and one was conventional. Traditional was meant for historic, where there was a lot of skinnier, deeper lots, and conventional was for the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, I guess still today, the wider lots that aren't as deep, and the houses typically are sitting sideways. They're with the wide length. The width is facing the street. So if you were to say this is just a house and it's no different than another neighborhood, you could actually affect how these buildings sit on their lots so that you could get the efficiency of shorter, narrower width lots with less road frontage being consumed.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, the other standards that apply in the district also would apply to manufactured housing units.
Components.
I.e., if you have to have a stoop or a porch, you have to have a stoop or a porch on the gable end as it faces the street, just like you would if it was stick built. And that's not an unreasonable requirement, and will go a long way for, you know, incorporating those buildings into a neighborhood.
Okay, we're going to move on from there. So we touched a little bit on the differences between T3s. The same can occur with T4 districts. And this is that sort of side view. On the left is the beautiful historic Strathglass we talked about. There was this smaller, tighter T3 marching down the hill with the bigger. And then we get sort of to a different kind of T4, two sets of T4s. You know, this is a bigger footprint building, more units, larger size, occupying more of their lots, probably taller floors than what is going on this road frontage and in this block. So the coder's choice here, and you know, we like to say it's clean if you're starting from scratch to have like facing like. It's sort of like an urban design rule, and in this case, there is no like facing like. The larger homes, their backs are to the street, which is an interesting condition, I think, here. And it's actually a very green street along its one side. But then you have these apartment homes, and they're sitting very tight to the street with beautiful front porches. So in this case, this would be coded likely as a T3. This would be a choice. Do we want to stay with a smaller T4, or do we want to just upzone and have this whole area be something else? There is a little nuance here, and you know, because it's old and historic, you know, nothing is clean and perfect. There is a block, half a block of T5, and arguably there was more of it in this sort of core area here. Of course, some of it was removed probably from fire. Some of it still remains today. So those are examples of, yes, you might end up with two distinctly different T4s. But if your choice is to allow increased density, increased units, and if you've run a pro forma and you know that this 2.5, 3-story isn't as easy to build because it's not financially as viable as something taller, then you may make the choice to upzone. All right, here's another really beautiful example of coding and making those choices about districts. There's a bunch of things going on here in Sanford, and a couple of them to point out. So recognizing down here, these buildings are not attached, but they're sitting on the street. So we can see that through, obviously through the visuals. If we went out and measured it, we would observe the distances between buildings, the spaces. We would document their lot widths and their building widths, and we would be able to choose the palette of building types that this area is expressing. So this is T4. And it might be, again, a big T4. Over here, this is all connected and sitting at 0 lot line. This is T5. This whole block is T5. And then, of course, we've got the suburban stuff going on here. So for the coder, the question is, what am I doing with this? If the intent is to get more of the T5, the connected buildings, but we acknowledge that the market may not support that, we may do something permissive with a T4. We may give a very, like, we'll calibrate the T4 to say, you can attach some buildings together up to 140 feet in width or 160 feet in width. So if you look across the street, this large building and this building here, you know, those two could come together and it would still be a T4. But this block right here, if we measured it, we would find it's definitely bigger than a 250-foot length. And so how much building you allow to connect is going to affect how the street functions and feels. So it's getting, again, to that block length that we talked about in the last webinar. So these are decisions that are going to be partly market driven. What can you support for redevelopment? And how do you make sure that your code isn't freezing something? Because if you were to go in and say, you only get to do T5, you may knock out you may not be able to get T5. So you're either going to get stuck with a parking lot and nothing, or you're going to be waiting. And I think that you have to make that decision. And, you know, people like Ivy, you know, it's a part of what we do. We're always running pro formas. So just as Ben is saying, go out and measure. Ivy and I are very supportive of doing pro formas and calculate, do the math, run your spreadsheets, know that what you're coding for can be built. There's a couple of quirks in here in this frontage, just to note that this is also T4 and it's moving down out into a T3 neighborhood that probably has a mix of small apartments in it. So as you're coding, this is going back to what Ben said, pay attention to what the building types are in those districts. Okay, this is a question that comes up, I think, often, which is, well, what happens if it's single story? Is it still T5? And the answer is yes. So if you are, and I think that coders will disagree, like there's debate on this one, but from my perspective, Ivy's perspective, Ben, if it's on the street and it's connected, the experience from that ground level is T5. And, you know, whether or not over time it's viable to add additional stories, this is where you would make a choice that says, you know, next to this T5 block, we have some very large buildings. Down the road from this portion of the street, we have other large buildings attached. So let's code for the largest building. And if by some crazy, magical, whatever, we can get additional stories on any of these buildings, we'll take them. Okay, so I think we touched on this one already with the mobile home park, but I think it's good to circle back to this, which is you have things that are already on the landscape and you're going to have to make choices about what to do with them. The solar farm is probably a module. And the reason it's a module and you'd handle it like that is because it probably has 4 code pages of standards just for the treatment of that solar farm. It's got decommissioning regulations. It maybe has special application submission requirements. All of those things make it handled as a module. And you take the 4 sheets or the 3 sheets of code that you have now, and it gets inserted as a module. If it's something simple like a drive-through, you might call that, you know, say that that's just performance standards tied to a use. And if there's 2 or 3 standards associated with a use, handle it as a performance standard. And then again, it might be a special district, but most likely in this case, the solar farm is a module. Solar farms are allowed in whatever districts you decide that they're going to be allowed in. And the mobile home park, it may be a special district. It may be that it's assigned to, it has a module of standards associated to wherever it is, just like the solar farm, wherever it is that you're allowing that to be.
Vanessa?
Yeah.
I don't know if you covered it because I wasn't involved with the second webinar, but I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit about the difference between like primary or core districts versus special districts, and specifically
Yeah,
what makes a
yeah,
special district a special district.
sure. We did cover it in the second webinar, but I think that's really good to go backwards on that. And maybe this isn't the right slide to do it.
That's fine.
No, but let's do that. So a special district is distinctly different from another district because there's a handful of things going on in it that make it unique. And an example might be a campus special district. And that is maybe a school site. So it could be a historic campus, it's got a quad. There's some very large buildings that might be facing onto a civic space or a quad. Those large buildings are like an anomaly to a neighborhood. They may be, if you think of like Bowdoin College, it's sitting with residential all around it, and the buildings on the college campus itself are actually quite large. Same with Middlebury College in Vermont. Pineland campus is another example of that, where there were some very large buildings around spaces and internal streets, and they just behave differently in that they're not going to follow a prescriptive set of standards that are the same as the area that it is adjacent to. Does that help to define examples of what some special districts might be?
Yeah, I think
okay.
the closely coupled to a use is one of the defining characteristics of a special district.
Right, and that it's just behaving very differently from the land that's around it. So when we were working in Nashua, we found a fabrication special district that was this cluster of old buildings that was behaving sort of like as a campus inside a neighborhood. And so that was like a very distinctly different thing from everything that was going on around it.
And the importance of identifying those is so that you don't end up, lumping that special area, that special district, into the districts that are around it. And you could very easily destroy the character of both the special district and potentially the neighborhood district that it's near by lumping them all together. And so
right.
The separation of those is really important.
Because you don't want to make one thing non-conforming. So for the examples of those campuses, the college campuses with, clearly 4-story, very large buildings, those may not be, you may not want to authorize those in the neighborhood adjacent to where those are, but they happen to work because they may be surrounded by a bunch of open space, and it's just sort of like they're functioning as a building group together. But use is definitely a piece of that thinking. Sometimes special districts get assigned also to places like when we've talked about sprawl repair in the last webinar, that you may just say, we have like a snowball's chance in hell of seeing redevelopment. So we're going to color this on the map as special district and say anything goes, well, within reason on the standards, but that, we're going to be very open to use, very open to buildings. And we're just going to try our hardest to get something to occur here. And you may be incredibly permissive on purpose because you're pushing, I keep using metaphors today about boulders and snowballs, but it's like you're pushing a boulder up a hill, and you're faced with a lot of challenges for seeing redevelopment of land. So again, it may be about what you're trying to accomplish, but how you're going to get there. All right, this is another example of, is it 2 districts, coming up against each other, or 3 districts coming up against, kind of meeting in the center. In the foreground is the more historic parts of a paper mill, and a good portion of that mill is still in operation, and a portion of that mill has been redeveloped and has a variety of neighborhood amenities and services that are going on in it. So the question is, what do we do with this? So if this exists in your town, you could say this is a special district. And to the point of being permissive, you might open up all the uses and say, you know, anything goes here. We're open to everything and anything. And we're also not going to care about parking. We're not going to care, you know, a myriad of things that you want to be permissive about, because what you really want is investment in that building. So you won't choose. The other thing is that this building footprint is incredibly large, so it does not look like anything else adjacent to it. And or would you probably imagine that you would rebuild that? So it is questionably, it could be a special district. You could also say that you can address its reuse through an adaptive reuse permit. We're going to touch on that in a moment as well. But it is sitting in what's clearly around it a T5 area, commercial area, with a lot of gaps because of demolition and loss over time. I feel like we should be doing pop quiz at this point. What is this? Ben, do you want to talk about this one a little bit?
Well, I mean, it's another great example, right? Where you've got a big kind of question ahead of you. The street that runs horizontally across the middle of that picture, below it obviously is some sort of T3 neighborhood. And it's butting up right against these massively large buildings, and it's surrounded even on the right there. And we don't know what's going on above that, but the question is, what do you make that? You know, you could make an argument that that's a special fabrication district. And it probably is some sort of special district. There's no way, there are no building types that exist that are that large these days. And so anytime you have this condition, you're always going, and a lot of times they're vacant buildings, especially in Maine, you're looking for some sort of adaptive reuse inside that special district to create some other opportunity for development, and maybe there's tax incentives involved. It's a tricky one, because it feels like you've got these you know, factories butting right up against, nestled into, sitting in the middle of you know, a sleepy little neighborhood. And
Yeah, it's the classic walk to work. So I think the thing that I didn't say about the adaptive reuse permit, we'll have a couple more slides on that, is that the adaptive reuse permit is actually in the administrative section, and that's how you handle it. And it's about getting a permit for something that, you know, that it's a large building, it sits inside an area or a neighborhood that it, you know, it's like a church, or we'll just go to the next slide. Because I think that's, oh, sorry, we're going to come back to it. Maybe not. We'll pause on the church slide. I think it's possible I also took it out. But so the adaptive reuse permit is allowing you to open up a whole myriad of uses that perhaps you wouldn't normally just authorize in the district. So if you have an old mill, if you have a church, those, and there's no longer a need for those buildings to function as they were originally intended through their design, that it makes their redevelopment just a little bit easier. Churches are really difficult to redevelop, but if suddenly you say, well, you can do all sorts of things in here, just so long as those things are not creating some kind of noxious use to the neighborhood, that's a way to unlock the use table. The other piece that the PlaceCode offers, and these are going to be choices that you're going to make as you sit and go through to calibrate your districts and decide which uses to authorize, you're going to be thinking not just about your district, but you're going to be thinking about your building types, the building types you've authorized in those districts, as well as the building groups. So you will get to say yes to more things because you're controlling some of that scale or intensity of use through the building typologies. And that is incredibly important. I think we get so caught up in talking about form because it's such a departure of how we've done things in the past that we sort of shadow or downplay use. But the elegance of coding with building types is being able to say yes to more uses and to be able to control through that scale that is imposed by using building types. Go
Vanessa,
for it.
we just had a conversation like this in Elliott last night. The question was, can we, can this use be allowed here? And the answer is, if this use is not noxious and will fit into one of our existing building types, then yes, absolutely go for it. If it's a use that doesn't fit into one of these building types, the first question is, can it go someplace else in town? And if the answer is yes, then you can say, no, you can't do that here because that's not what we're trying to accomplish here. And using the building types as the determiner of the uses is people get that. I think that's really clear. And the other thing, of course, is that by being more permissive about uses based on the building types, you're allowing a building to change over time. That building, that there's a lot of embodied energy in a built building, and if we can allow those buildings to change their use easily over time, that's a win for all of us. Not to be putting buildings up and taking them down all the time, but allowing them to be repurposed easily because they fit is a win for all of us.
Great. Okay, there's my church slide. I was like, where did my church slide go? So this is the classic one. And I think, where we gave you an example of in Brunswick, well, this is, very much a messy and fun and active T4. But if that church is sitting surrounded by T3 and all you can do is housing, then its redevelopment would be a challenge. And I love that Ben put in here, like all the things it's been since it's no longer been a church. So buildings, they do need to be able to flex over time. And this is one of those ways of allowing that to happen. And we've already touched on the mill buildings. Like there, we have to have an easy, quick path to getting investment into those structures. Okay, I think we are almost at a break. This was in I call this the quirky code things that you're going to encounter when you go out and do the measuring. And there's probably a whole bunch of them, but the rule, and you'll see it, is that churches and civic buildings are always stepping back from the street. And so you might have a district, this may be a T4 district, but when you are including a building typology that it's a civic building, you're going to include a standard that allows them to move back from the street, which is in alignment with our historic patterns. So we want to maintain the reverence around our civic buildings and make sure that when we're calibrating, we don't lose this. These are very important pieces of our history to be thinking about as we're doing coding.
I think this is an appropriate place. Just go back real quick, Vanessa. I just want to say one quick thing before we take a short break.
If I can figure out how to, because the screen is different than before. So I'm going to stop the share.
Sorry.
And Zoom is doing, it's putting icons right where I need them not to be.
Gotta love technology.
No, not today.
Not today.
But yeah, just give me a second.
That's fine. What I was going to say when we look at that picture and what Vanessa was saying about how you can add these conditions for, civic buildings or other things that have a little bit of quirkiness to them. What I was going to say about that is when defining your districts and looking at the metrics of the districts, you have a wide latitude and flexibility to create space for those quirky conditions to happen at the district level thinking. And so if you're thinking about messing with some metrics, the best way and the way the PlaceCode encourages you to do that is, again, through measuring doing those synoptic surveys, and then you would tweak, you'd say, these are the building types that we have, but here are the conditions that we don't want to make non-conforming, so we're going to add some performance standards on the district page that maybe alter or change a little bit for that district. What you probably want to avoid is changing the metrics for the building types themselves. The building types, the attempt with the building types is to really provide that catalog of tools that you can use to identify existing buildings, and also say these are the types of buildings we want to allow in these districts, and these are the kinds that we don't want to allow in these districts. And so tinkering with the metrics of the building types isn't as good or as flexible an idea when you're considering how to deal with these coding challenges as it is to play with the metrics of the district itself. Does that make sense? Am I expressing that correctly? So you can change the size of the lots, you can change the setbacks, you can change anything that relates to how buildings are placed or oriented in your specific district. And if you stick to the building types themselves, it gives you, without changing those metrics, it gives you a good foundation for understanding, again, what actually comprises the district, what makes it special, how you identify the character of that district, and where that edge of the district is before you get to the next district.
Yeah, I think the short form is adjust the building, do not adjust the building metrics. Do not adjust the building metrics. You have creative license to adjust the district metrics. Okay. All right, we're going to take a brief break. It is 11:02. We will start sharply at 11:07. And those who want to take a break, please feel free. We're going to get started again. It's kind of hard to know who's back because everybody is cameras off and mics off. So if you, yeah, thank you, Tracy Gear. If anyone wants to, good, thanks for the thumbs up. All right, so it's helpful. We can see some faces and know, yay, hello, everyone. It's so much nicer when we see faces. And, you know, our preference would be to do this training in the field. Just to say that, like, we've spent a lot of time talking about sort of like these experiences as coders, and it may be that we're jumping a little from place to place, but you know, there's nothing like teaching coding in the field. And I think that will be something we'll be exploring for early spring, if not maybe a little bit this fall. There's, you know, the getting out and actually walking places and talking is probably one of the best ways for the information to cement. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Ivy, Ben, you're here, ready to go.
Yes.
And great. Okay. All right. So Ben, why don't you kick us off with our next part of this program, which we would like to do some group discussion and hear from you and your communities about the things that you are experiencing from a coding perspective, some challenges, other things that you're working on, you know you'll be working on, or that you can anticipate that will be challenging for you. But Ben, why don't you kick us off this section?
All right, so story time. I love stories. I'm a big believer in the power of teaching through stories, both spoken and listened to. So it's the way I like to communicate. So I'm going to tell a story about one of the process we went through in Newcastle and some of the things that came out of it. Some of you may have heard me tell this story before, so if you have, just tune out. But I'm going to say it again anyway. So Newcastle went through a big process back in 2016. It was our largest public planning process that we'd ever undertaken. It was for both our comprehensive plan and redoing our land use ordinance at the same time, which is, like, you know, a very difficult thing to do. It was a lot to think about, and there were a lot of pieces to it, obviously. But a lot of good came out of it. And one of the things that we discovered, and it became apparent very early on, was that the majority of our conversation was going to be centered around how do we deal with rural issues. And as we measured, and as we looked, and as we went out into our rural areas, we found that there was a lot more business, a lot more industry happening in our rural areas that we knew about, but collectively hadn't kind of put together in our mental space. And and so the challenge became to those of us on the team and our consultants, how do we code for this? How do we make what is in reality now a lot of nonconformity in our rural areas not be nonconforming? And because those businesses that exist add a lot of value to our community, they just happen to be located in a rural area. Rural, I feel, has gotten a bad rap for a lot of different reasons. It tends to be a catch-all, especially for people who are used to doing zoning maps or regulating plans. The way you typically think about rural is you code everything else first, and anything that's left over, that's rural. And we typically just color it green, and we say rural. And then we lock down the uses and say, well, pretty much just, you know, agriculture, some industrial stuff like mineral extraction and timber harvesting and traditional rural activities, and then it's just single family housing. That solution wasn't going to be good enough for Newcastle, primarily because what we were hearing from our residents was two things, and I call it the magic unicorn argument, right? Which is, on the one hand, people said, look, we really don't want anything to change. We love our rural character. We live in rural. We consider ourselves, you know, this is our home. This is our neighborhood. We don't want anything to change. Okay, we heard you there. But then in the next breath, the very next sentence was, but we want to be able to do whatever we want to do. Don't tell us what to do. We want to be able to do anything. And therein lies the crux, right? How do you, as a coder, as a planner thinking about this, how do you unlock or enable more uses in the rural area without essentially just upzoning it and letting it be something that's not rural, which would go against the first thing they said, which is they want to keep it rural. Big challenge, right? And I'm sure this is not something that, you know, we're alone in facing. Rural is a continuing problem. So we batted around a whole bunch of ideas. We explored conservation subdivisions, cluster developments. We talked about, you know, how we could enable those uses that we were finding, like oxbow brewing. If anyone's ever had a chance to come to Newcastle, it's in North Newcastle. You go down this road that's just literally miles of trees, and then all of a sudden, bang, you find this brewery, and it's got all these buildings around it. It supports a whole bunch of people, jobs, and it's a treasure of our community. But it was completely non-conforming. As a matter of fact, after we really looked at the old ordinance that we were trying to replace, we discovered it never should have been permittable in the first place. Like, it should just not have been allowed to exist. And that was a big problem. And we actually had the owners come and we talked to them, and we said, well, look, you know, what is it you're trying to do with the site? And they want to do all kinds of stuff. They wanted to do some eco tourism. They wanted to put trails in the back. They wanted to have yurts back there. They wanted to do more uses than what they were doing. They wanted to have festivals and events. They wanted to have live music. They wanted to have, in addition to the brewing and the tap room, they wanted to have food trucks and maybe a restaurant in the future. Those are typically non-rural compatible uses, but we wanted them. So how did we get them? And after a lot of banging our head against brick walls, the solution was through a lot of investigative work, this idea that building groups may be an answer to how to allow rural to remain roughly rural without upzoning and unlock more uses. So can you flip to the next slide, Vanessa? Yeah, there you go. So two different building groups were identified as potential solutions. The idea was, within a 250-foot or a 500-foot radius in a rural area on a certain acreage of land, we could allow greater density as long as they met certain setback requirements to maintain the rural character of the experience of driving along the road. And it would allow for bigger building types, more units within those building types, and more uses within those building types. So we have in the Maine PlaceCode library one called the large rural compound, which you see here, and the other one is a small rural compound. The difference basically being the number of units, the types of buildings you can have in them, and the number of acres you need. So one of the very first things we did, and I know I'm going long in this story, but it's a good story. One of the very first things we did was, when we were trying to figure this out, we went to the folks in the rural, and we have a meeting house up there in North Newcastle, and we said, everybody who's interested, please come. We had like 75 people, which for Newcastle was huge, in this tiny little clubhouse, essentially. And we were talking about ideas. We were just trying to get a sense of what to do. And one of the first things we said was, how would everyone feel if we increased the minimum lot size? You can imagine how that went over, right? We said, how do you feel about 5 acres? How do you feel about 10 acres? How do you feel about 3 acres? Because currently it's zoned, or it was zoned 1 to 2 acres. And it went over like a lead balloon. I mean, it was just down in flames. Nobody wanted larger lots. They did not view that as a way to protect their rural character. They saw that potential as that potential solution as a taking. They said, well, how am I going to, give lots to my children when they grow up and they want to build houses? How am I, some people said, that 50 acres I have, that's my retirement. I plan on selling that to a developer, or creating a subdivision and selling the lots or something like that. I need to have the value. And if you increase the minimum lot size, you've taken away all my value. Okay. And we were really trying not to be dismissive of anything. That was a hard conversation because they were very, very, very firm about not wanting to raise the minimum lot size. Ultimately, I should add that the current Newcastle zoning code has no minimum lot sizes. Even in rural, we don't have minimum lot sizes. And this is one of the ways we were able to get there. One of the compromises was, okay, we're not going to do minimum lot sizes, but we're going to have larger road frontages to protect that rural character as you're driving along the road. We're going to have different standards for setbacks. We're going to limit the building types unless you do one of these compounds. The beauty of this, and I don't know that we have the slide, you can't really go back, can you, Vanessa?
Are you looking?
I was going to look at the
the
use table.
Oh, yes.
But you know what? It's okay. We were showing it earlier. If you go to the Notion site, which is mainplacecode.notion.site, you go to Article 4 and you click on the use table, you can see there that the second column, T2, has a whole bunch of uses that are permittable. It's like a brown tag that says building group. It's a lot of uses. And you look at them again, it's the uses you wouldn't traditionally think of as being present in rural areas: restaurants, live entertainment, things like that. And we were able to get there by saying to folks, look, here is an optional tool. You in rural generally have larger lots to begin with. Here's an optional tool that we're not going to force on you like larger minimum lot sizes. But if you choose to establish a large rural compound on 10 acres of land, then you can develop that 10 acres of land with more buildings, more building types, more units, and all these uses, instead of just the 2 or 3 or 4 that are typically allowed in rural. And it was a huge win. It's the magic unicorn patch, right? The solution that was sort of discovered or created through the process of just, again, beating our head against a brick wall for months and months. And so far it's been great. This tool has led several discussions at the planning board where folks have come with plans to do sort of what I would call a traditional 1980s subdivision plan. And we insist on doing a pre-submittal for any of those subdivision plans before they file them. for an application review. And just the process of talking to the landowners and showing them this as an alternative tool to that traditional subdivision development has led to at least 2 different subdivisions completely changing the way they were going to be drawn on the land to include more land area to take advantage of the possibility that future owners might want to use a small or a large compound to unlock those uses, to get those bigger building types. And so it's been very successful so far. I wouldn't say it's very, ubiquitous. Not a lot of people know about it. We have a lot of education that we still have to do. But for those that we've had conversations with, it's been very positive. They've left and said, oh my God, this is amazing. And they understand intrinsically there's more value to offering someone a piece of land on which you can do more potentially than there would be on sticking with the 1 and 2 acre model of just single family dwelling units development in rural, which, as everybody kind of knows, is what leads to sprawl, right? And so this idea is helps counter that idea of sprawl into rural areas, as well as unlock those uses that they were asking for. And because we've got good setback standards and good dimensional standards for how they relate to the road and to each other, it won't produce sprawl in rural in a way that changes rural or really upzones rural from a T2 to a T3.
Hey, Ben, we
Yes.
had a question in the chat, which I thought was interesting, which was, did changing the setbacks in the rural district leave room for trails and sidewalks? I know that you probably don't have sidewalks. Nowhere I work ever has sidewalks. But what about the trail question?
Yeah, absolutely. Trails for sure. We've got a couple of different projects happening right now for trails. One of them is considering a building group. Another one is already sort of an established situation. But yeah, sidewalks, we don't have sidewalks in Newcastle in the rural at all. Sidewalks, I actually would say if you have sidewalks along a road, that's one of the big indicators that it's not T2.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's a big
So-
indicator you've got a T3 situation
Yep.
emerging.
Having come along for this journey with Newcastle as the code writer, there's a couple of other distinctions here just to make sure. So Ben, describe those carrots. Like what are the carrots that you get for doing this thing? But from my perspective, a big piece of this was also about, how much of the area of a site we're disturbing. So to be very clear, that circle is about keeping all of your development inside that circle. So you're getting, yes, I get to have more of these other things, but what I'm placing on myself is a restriction that I can't go outside the circle of that 250 or whatever that radius is that is set for the large or the small compound. And that is coming from precedent. So that's coming from deep research done at examining how other farm compounds all across New England have evolved over, 100 or so years of how people locate things on their land. So there was the synoptic surveying, there is precedent that has been explored that is informing some of the design and the requirements that you are voluntarily taking on in order to have the permissiveness of more uses and more development. Excuse me. A twist to this, of course, is going to be for calibration that, there's a lot of things going on at the state level. So, you'll have to calibrate and figure out what your carrots are for numbers of units. And that's going to be the local work that you're going to do to make this an attractive tool for people to voluntarily use. So it's a great story, Ben. And I call it the Oxbow conundrum. Like, how do you take this thing that's completely illegal and wildly successful and do more of those? So we're going to stop the screen share for the moment. And if you are willing to turn on your cameras, I think this would be a really great opportunity to hear from you about some of those code challenges that you're facing in your community. What's happening in your community? What do you think you're going to want to address with PlaceCode calibration? And, let's see if we can do a little bit of a back and forth about some things that are in this code library that might help you. And Ivy, if you want to help moderate, and then Perry, if you want to watch the chat as well. Great. Thanks for turning on your cameras, those who have.
Anybody got a story they want to share? Or a challenge they're facing? Because I'll just keep telling stories.
We got stories.
All right,
Is
I
there
have one.
anything?
Oh,
Good.
good.
Okay.
I am in Southwest Florida, and we have golf courses that are going defunct now. And so how would you approach that in a form-based code?
So do you want me to, Ivy? I've got a short and
Go
sweet
ahead
one.
and no, go ahead, Vanessa. I have thoughts, but I
Yeah,
think it's probably the same as yours.
Follow-up
Go ahead.
question. Have you done any community engagement to ask the community what it is they would like to see happen with that land?
They want someone to bring their golf course back.
Oh,
They
well,
don't want the golf course to go. They want their golf course views, but yet
Yeah.
none of them were really becoming members and paying for the golf course. So just economically, and what is happening is just more single family homes are coming in, abutting more single family homes. And of course, those are they're the same use as what exists, but everyone's unhappy.
Yeah.
So
I was going
Vanessa,
to say illustrative master plan process with your community,
Yeah.
and if possible to be able to tease out why they're there in the first place. I mean, my understanding, this is the phenomena of 20 something years ago when we were starting to do greenways planning. We would talk about golf courses, and half the people living there didn't golf, or even less, and they were there for some other reason, because the market had delivered a product, i.e. housing around green space, that wasn't being delivered in other places. So I would do illustrative master planning, community engagement, to see if you can bring in the economics behind, what other things could happen there besides housing that would also sort of get those check marks for the things that they're hoping to see in the future. And that's the start, because with that, with that vision of what can go there, and then with the metrics, the pro formas, and understanding the financial viability of redevelopment, then you can all get to a place where you know what to code for. But without that, you don't know what you're coding for.
The other thing I would add is defunct, especially defunct golf courses offer a huge opportunity to create really awesome civic spaces and good building type development around the edges of those civic spaces, because you've already got a massive green space. So if it's truly defunct and the owners are not going to revive it in any way, shape, or form, the opportunity, instead of just filling it in and parceling it up and chopping it into subdivisions or more single family housing, is the establishment of core civic spaces. And those are actually in the place code in Article 5, I believe, under development. So if you were to develop, go to the town with a plan to maybe establish a square or civic space, a large civic space, with
linear park, or
bigger
a
park,
combination of all of those things.
Yeah, with some new thoroughfares that cut through, and then you could front some multifamily buildings, duplexes, triplexes, quads, apartment houses, townhouses on those civic spaces, and create really amazing places. Instead of, and that would be part of the illustrative master plan that Vanessa and Ivy are talking about. I see that as a huge opportunity. If the goal of the community is just bring back the golf course, and that's just not going to happen.
It's not one of our choices today.
Right. Yeah.
As we
So
say in
essentially
nursery school.
it's a clustering, then, what you're saying.
I don't think it's clustering necessarily. I think it's it's identifying how you get a mix of new development to support possibly preserving and protecting, the things that people have enjoyed there, which might be walking the golf course. So, maybe you keep those you know, the I don't play golf, but like when you hit the ball and then it goes down a thing, what's that called? The
Fairway.
lane,
Fairway.
that's it. Yes. So those connections.
I don't play
I love
golf.
how Rebecca's laughing at me. So yeah, it might be that, you know, that parts of that system stay in place, and as Ben is describing, you know, that's filling in discrete places.
And I think that, I mean, leaving it as a golf course is not one of our choices. Parceling it up into single family housing lots is a bad choice economically and ecologically, and all those other reasons why we know that's not a good choice. So I think the trick is going to say, what is a really good thing that we could have here? And I think Ben's notion of creating civic spaces that have uses besides single family house around them is the vision that you need to share with people in a way that makes this possible, because in the end they don't own that golf course. The people who own the golf course own the golf course. So we have to come to something that is going to work for as many people as possible. And those people who are living in those golf course houses, I mean, they're probably my age and they feel like they're going to be that age forever, but they're not. And one of the things that having different housing types in that neighborhood is, it's a place that when you're done having that big suburban house on that big suburban lot, you can stay where you are. And that's a conversation that's probably worth having. You know, are there things that people want that we don't have here because all we have is big suburban houses on big suburban lots?
You could also potentially limit the single family dwelling units to cottage courts.
Exactly.
Okay.
I probably would.
That's
Actually,
Yeah,
the
I
only
think
way to
we have this
establish.
tendency to jump ahead and try and solve your thing, but
Yeah.
you know, to point out
We
that we're
do.
experiencing
No, these are great
this.
suggestions.
Yeah, I think the
I see you,
engagement process
Denise.
is a big way to get at the thing, but just we're having this issue in Maine too. So I want to just be clear. There's been some communities where the golf course is questionably not staying, and then it's like, well, what do we do next? Denise, you had a question?
I was just curious, is the golf course 18 holes?
Yes, it is.
Is there a way to do a 9-hole?
The owner of the golf course is not interested in the golf course at all, so that is off the table. But yeah, if you can have some other use around a civic use, or like you're saying, just different types of residential. I think just people go to the default of what a national builder does because it's easy. It's easy to get funding for it.
Yeah, it's easy.
But that doesn't mean that it's the best choice.
Right, and it's probably legal by right. I mean, it's probably,
Correct.
you know,
Right.
you
The
can
other
just
thing
walk
probably
in.
needs zoning changes.
Yeah, you're going to need a zoning change, but yeah, that's how I would approach it. I think we're all in agreement on that.
Yeah, that's a good one. So yeah, we have seen the same issue here in Maine, my little town. It's definitely an issue we're experiencing too.
I
Does
think
anybody else
everybody
have
is.
some things going on in their towns, unique challenges that they see?
Hi, I have a kind of story and then leading to a question. So my name's Steven. My background is in urban planning, and this kind of story question is more coming just from my planning background, being a planning nerd, and my wife also has a planning background, so really nerd out with planning in our community outside of work. But on the day-to-day, I'm in federal planning, primarily military clients, but located outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so in a small community about 4 miles outside, 3 miles outside city limits. And one thing that's just fascinated me, I mean, is we have a lot of older communities as well, um, especially that inner ring kind of streetcar suburb type areas. You can clearly tell where there used to be some more vitality, and by that I mean corner stores, maybe older shops that have since passed that grandfathered stage. Zoning has happened, has made it residential. More than likely for the foreseeable future will remain residential for better or worse because those buildings have now been fully converted into just strictly residential. But I mean, there have been success stories around other communities that have kind of leaned back into the culture of corner stores, pubs, and things like that because it brings that walkable element to an area that, I mean, if you're not familiar with Pittsburgh, very hilly. We have a lot of public steps that are in poor condition, and that further hinders kind of accessibility to areas where otherwise, I mean, as the bird flies, I'm a quarter mile away from our community's main street, but I also have three
Can't get
kids.
there.
Can't
Yeah.
get there. I have three kids under the age of 5. Those steps are a little scary to navigate down. So it forces us to get into the car and get down there. Meanwhile, we had a former corner store a block away. Um, so long-winded way to get to the question of like what type of tools are there to avoid doing spot zoning, but just to maybe kind of even start from square one to push the ideas that having some of these functions within primarily residential areas isn't necessarily a bad thing, but complete opposite, that it could really boost property values, it can boost vitality within your community, accessibility to necessary things that we all want in our communities.
I think I would start by I'd start by having some community conversations and talk about what kind of challenges people have. And I'm betting that you are not the only person that thinks, wow, it would be really great if I could let my kid go get a popsicle. And so I always think, I mean, yes, it is true that we always want to solve your problem for you. But the first thing to do is to have that conversation with your neighbors and talk about, what they miss and what their challenges are, and go from that way. And parallel to that, I think the conversation about the economic value to the township of having mixed use in your neighborhoods is also worth having. I mean, we've all seen the work that Urban 3 has done. We know that, that little corner store is really valuable in terms of the economics of your place. So I think those are 2 places I would start. And then after that, I would think about, what streets are the most logical to allow more uses. Because you don't want to just spot zone a corner here and a corner there.
Right.
But you could establish corners that, okay, on these corners, you can have different things.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah. Because it's not like we can bring every single corner back that was something non-residential. And like you said, may not make sense just based on how things have evolved. But no, that's a good points. Thank you for that.
One of the things that we will do is, we'll visit the Historical Society. We're going to look for those places where they used to be. And we'll sort of do that analysis of figuring out what's within a reasonable quarter-mile walk of an intersection, and then start to have conversation around, if we are going to be less car dependent, then can we put some of those services back? And you may end up not just, coloring on the map 1 lot, you might do 3, or you might span the intersection. You might do all 4 sides of an intersection or 3 sides of an intersection, whatever that might be. But that's not spot zoning if you're doing 2 lots.
I also think, a big part of that would be to rezone and incorporate building types and disincentivize single family dwelling units and incentivize mixed use buildings first and multi-unit residential second, possibly with tax incentives. And
I'd be careful though not to require mixed use within the building. I think that's harder to do, particularly as you come back at things. I think we're always tempted to say, oh, well, it has to be retail on the ground floor if you rebuild here. And don't do that, because it's sometimes it's that economic question is this going to be economically viable?
Right.
Other thing I would look at is, what are your rules about rehab? Do you have really cuckoo rules about rehabbing a building and changing the use? How comfortable is your building inspector with the idea of the International Existing Building Code? I mean, do they know what it is? Do they know how to use it? Or do they think it's some, conspiracy for making dangerous buildings?
No, and I appreciate you saying the part about to kind of just be hesitant with the retail on the ground floor and things above, because I mean, so many times around the city and local communities. I mean, you see these new apartment developments that, yeah, on paper, as you're taught in planning school way back when, it's like, yeah, this is great. There's liveliness on the ground, but there's so many of these new developments that now just have these cookie cutter taking up an entire city block, that the ground floor is still released. The floor itself isn't even finished yet because no one has had interest because the rents may be too high, or the um want isn't there necessarily.
We're over retailed as a country. I
Yes,
mean, we
right.
just have way too much retail.
Mhm.
So this is a conversation I have with towns all the time, is that on their main street, they want to make what, you know, if it's the state highway that runs through the city of the middle of their little town, they want to make every building have retail on the ground floor. And that's not a reasonable desire.
Right.
So
So the incorporation of different building types, but also don't forget that like the redevelopment of the street itself can play an amazing role against you know, people seeing the potential for different building types and development to happen along that street. Simple things, even like, you know, adding street trees, following the complete street lines, adding more civic spaces, even pocket parks or benches to sidewalks, making that sort of curb appeal better increases people's perception of what can be accomplished in a neighborhood without even changing any of the underlying, you know, what's currently on the environment. You change the streetscape, will encourage a different kind of development. And if you allow that different kind of development through building types to happen, you could achieve a transformation of a neighborhood. It would take some time, obviously, but as people drive through it, they'll notice the change.
Absolutely. Yeah. Huge proponent of
The value
streetscapes.
of
Yeah.
adding, yeah, streetscapes, the value of adding even just like new granite curbing. So we're in New England, right? Granite curbing is like king here. But adding granite curbing has been proven over and over through study after study to add value to the neighborhood, regardless of what, if nothing else changes, that adds value in the perception, but also in taxes.
right. The other thing is check your parking requirements.
Yeah.
There is no point in allowing a corner store if you're going to require it to have 12 parking places.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You got to allow people to park on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true of adding new building types. It's true of adaptive reuse of existing buildings. If you allow conversion of a single family to a fourplex, but you require 8 parking spaces off street for that conversion is not going to happen.
All right, does anyone else have any questions, thoughts, something they'd like to share before we do a little bit more presentation? All right, I'm gonna go back to the deck. Okay, for the ease of my screen, I'm going to not go into presentation mode. It's been giving me all sorts of trouble today. All right, so we're just going to cover, I think, a little bit more on the technical side. And these are sort of like these words of wisdom. They're always evolving. And I think as coders and back to Ben's appeal earlier, we're looking at you as our peers. You're doing the hard work. We want to debate with you. We want to discuss things with you. We want to innovate with you. And so we're going to continue to evolve. We're humble people. This is all work in progress. There's always going to be something, as Ben says in Newcastle, every time they review an application for a project, it's an opportunity to check themselves and to make sure their zoning code is giving them what they need it to do. So here's a few words of wisdom. If you're thinking about doing a coding project, it is valuable to spend some time doing some housekeeping. I call it like no more fruit salad. Get your apples with your apples. So over the years, it's very common to parse in new standards because there was a new thing that was innovated or added on to code, and it was really difficult to stitch that into your existing code. You may, especially if you're a community that has a town council form of government, it may be helpful to go through 1 or 2 rounds of housekeeping. And that will give you the opportunity to put like with like. The apples go with the apples. Standards, if you've got them sitting in your definitions, get them out, get them somewhere else, or just flag it and know that you're going to address it in a future coding project. Some other things are going to come up as you're doing code work. You're going to look at your overlay districts, and you might say, with all of these new great standards that we're bringing in, we may be able to eliminate some districts. So if you were sort of dipping your toe politically into something like senior housing, and 20 years ago you created an overlay district to try and incentivize the use of something, you may be able to now just give that density, give the ability to do more through the building typologies, and eliminate some of those complicated things that we've layered into our codes. Design guidelines might trip you up if you've got those sitting in your zoning code now. If you decide that you're going to do what we call a hybrid code, which is, you're going to only adopt form-based coding or some of these standards in one area of your town, just watch that your design guidelines in other places are not going to conflict with the new standards you're bringing in. An example of that might be in road standards. It may be in landscaping standards. So this is part of that housekeeping, and it's kind of like how you decide what your coding approach and strategy is going to be for taking on all of this really good work. So I've been having, Google is doing all sorts of funky things to me today. So you're going to see my whole deck on the side. We know that there's been some good work done this session, and we're in this, we're going to go into rulemaking, but on first pass, looking at what was passed with LD 1829, I'm not seeing any issues with how to bring in those new standards with the building typologies platform. I think as the rulemaking will occur, we're going to stay in communication with Ben and Mocha, and we will make sure that what we are, as we're making some, as the rules are being drafted, that we're being mindful of how this will be incorporated into the building typologies approach.
And this is just for a heads up for all those people who don't live in Maine. This is specific to the state of Maine. And you should check wherever you live to see what's going on at the state level in your state, having to do with zoning issues,
any housing reforms
and housing reform, because everybody's, all the cool kids are doing it. So you should figure out what's going on in your state and either be helpful or not, depending.
Okay, so a couple of other things. As coders, you are going to be asked about, what is the right scope for a community, and whether you're making that decision for the community that you're working with, living in, or that you're going to help out another community do code work. A number of thoughts kind of come up for me on, how to know what that first big slug of work is going to be. Is there a local champion who is going to stay with this project like right through? And, are they seen as, somebody in the community with a lot of integrity, and they're trusted by all people? A local champion is incredibly helpful to have. Who else can you train while you're doing the code work? In the town of Yarmouth, knowing that we were going to do form-based coding, we trained up the chair of our comprehensive plan committee. We trained up our town manager. We trained up some other staff and some other volunteers, because we wanted as many people to be able to talk about the thing that we were doing, and to be prepared to have answers to help us out. Zoning is a campaign. All zoning is a campaign. And so again, that loops back to why it's really important to have a local champion. So all of these are factors. I think other ones, of course, is, staff capacity. What work can you do in-house? Where are you going to need technical assistance on the outside? Most people have busy day jobs, so they're going to need some kind of support for the work. You don't want to spend a ton of time doing zoning analysis before scoping a project or bidding on a project. It's really, at the same time, you do have to spend some time reading existing code and understanding just what you're getting into. And I think one of the ways that you can sort of, not to say protect your time, but to be very clear, is to define, when you get to the point where you have a draft code, how are staff going to help you move that code through a hearing and adoption process? Because that's an area where a community may need, 6 extra meetings. They may need 6 extra months. So you want to be careful that when you're doing the scoping, that there's an understanding, and I guess this goes back to the being humble, is there's an understanding that sometimes communities just need a little bit more time and they need a little bit more help, and we can't know what that's going to be. And like Ben's example, they decided to walk down a very complicated path of talking about what it would mean to take the rural areas and put them to 10 acres. That took them over a year of conversation that we as coders and contractors had no idea when we scoped that project. So these are all important considerations, and there's probably 20 others as well to share. But I think those are a good start. You've heard us say that talk to your community. We firmly believe that the place to start is with people. And if you do not start with people, you're going to find yourself 6 months, a year down the road, and you're backpedaling and you're redoing your work. And so if you can document that you have had a transparent process right from day one, that even if people jump in at the 11th hour, you can point to that work and say, here's all of the things that have led us to this point. And you're not going to be able to get everybody to engage. And some will come out at that 11th hour. But the work, doing the good work, documenting the work, it only helps to make it easier for more people to feel like they're holding the responsibility. And it's not just a handful of people standing at a podium saying, please pass this ordinance. It's the many hands make light work. We use a lot of the precedents. We talked about synoptic surveying earlier in the webinar, and talking about building typologies. This work of community engagement, you can take your community out, and in fact, it's incredibly empowering to give them a measuring wheel and those synoptic survey sheets and send them out in groups and assign them to areas of your community. If you don't have the good things that you think you're going to want to code for, send them to the neighboring community. Pick a place, send them there, send them to Freeport, send them to Gardner, send them to Kennebunkport. Go look at things. And the metrics are important. The gauging of community preference is really important. When I look at this visual preference survey, which is one tool of doing engagement, me as a coder, I can tell a lot just by looking at this image. And so we're going to be thinking about that as we're pulling examples of building types and seeing, and drawing illustrative plans and determining what those base elements of a new code might be. And this would be one of those kind of like side by side that you'll be able to land at as a coder. If the community is saying, green dots on the image on the left, red dots on the image on the right, well, both of those things are delivering commercial activity. So me as coder, I am further along in my understanding about how to work with my community, what those code sheets should look like, and and where we need to get to with code. I'm going to skip over a couple of slides. The engagement process that we are using a lot to do our work, whether it's comp planning or coding, we use this charrette process. I think I talked about it in a webinar previous. There's the National Charrette Institute website, which is at the University of Michigan. It's an institute. It's at the University of Michigan. You can learn a lot about the charrette process there and all of the great reasons why it's an accessible method of engagement. The fundamentals there are that it's offering the community multiple touch points over a period of time to be able to talk, iterate, workshop, understand, contribute, refine, and get to a solution over a short period of time. It's incredibly powerful as a tool to use in your toolkit. I have yet to find an example of where I feel disappointed by the outcomes. It's a way to bring your community along rather quickly and also not to lose people. We don't have time to work for a year and a half, and we shouldn't be asking that of our volunteers to slug it out, at nightly meetings for a year and a half to get a simple code change made, or even something a little bit more complex. And so these are just some of those examples of pictures of people doing the work. Very messy, it's very visual, and it advances, I think, very efficiently the ideas. So you can see in this image right here at a midpoint process, we're starting to take the things that the community are saying yes to and no to, and actually draw those, marry them to real land, real examples, and from there launch into code sheets and coding. All right, so that was zipping along. It is 11:55. The where to get help. As I was framing this, I'm like, wow, that sounds like there's going to be a mental health need to support here, and there might be. Coding is challenging, and the work we're doing is really hard but really important. People need housing. People need thriving Main streets, and kudos to everybody for taking the time to be here for this webinar and put more skills into the toolbox. I included phone numbers for our team. These 5, myself, Ben, Sarah, Ivy, and Kara, are primarily available for doing code work. We want to add your names to this list. So as you start to do the work and you're ready to help municipalities dig in, we want to build this list. So please reach out to us if you have any questions, you want to continue any of the dialogues that you've or thoughts that you've heard any of us share today. We're very happy to engage, and we do think a lot about zoning.
There's nothing we'd rather talk about. Just ask our children.
It's background processing all the time. I'm sure that Ivy has made her children lie down in the middle of the street in order to measure it and understand its width. Yeah, so we do some really nerdy things as coders, but we're grateful you're here, and we hope you're going to come along and help us do this hard work. Are there any last thoughts? Anyone want to share a feeling, a hopefulness feeling, something that's landing with you after hearing today's presentation? Any parting thoughts from anyone besides our team? I'm waiting for that uncomfortable moment. All right. Ben, you're muted still. Yeah, no, that's okay. All right, from our team, Ivy, Ben, anything you'd like to share before we wrap up?
No, except that this is really important work. People deserve good places to live. And it's uphill work. And there are days
Boulder.
Right, it's that boulder. We signed up to push the boulder. But we're here to help you push the boulder, and we really and truly, we are always happy. I go speak for myself. I'm always happy to be called up on the phone and somebody say, hey, can you talk to me about this? Because I'm stuck. And I may not have the answer, but sometimes just talking about it helps. Mental health is important.
And the only thing I would add to that is one of the primary intentions of the Maine PlaceCode library is to make it so you have a toolbox and you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you're going into a new project. You can already start with a good solid foundation. It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. We're always adding to it, changing it, making it better. We invite you to do that with us. But we recognize that having to reinvent the wheel every time is not an efficient way to go about things. And that's one of the primary reasons we wanted to do this project to begin with.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So as you heard us talk about all those little nuances, know that if you pulled this off the shelf and you have really terrible zoning, it's probably pretty darn good the way it is. But so thank you very much, Representative Geer. I want to acknowledge you for being here, and thank you as well for your hard work advancing housing initiatives in the state of Maine. One of those, it resulted in the Maine Housing Opportunity Program. So thank you kindly for your work.
Thanks for letting me spy on the meeting. No, this has been really, really interesting to see you all talk about, you know, the connection between being in the weeds and getting the coding work done, and how to connect that, and how you guys work to connect that with the goals and needs of communities. So it's just really a helpful perspective for me. As you guys know, as you know, Vanessa, I geek out
Yeah.
on this stuff because I think it's really interesting to see how this work gets done. So thanks for letting me be here.
Great, thank you. And Perry, thank you very much for hosting us. This is our third webinar. And can you please describe how people can get copies of things?
Yes, we will have follow-up within the next day or so. The past two webinars are on our YouTube channel, and I'll also share those out. And we'll get this recording up as well, and all the contact information.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, I think it's 12 o'clock. It's probably time to address grumbling stomachs. Thank you
Bye
so
all.
much,
Thanks again.
everybody.
See you all later.